Sup gamers, this is gonna be another video like last week's with standard, but this time it's gonna be with premium. So our budget again is $100, and to make this doable, we are not putting in Harmonics Messiah in these decks because that is basically the entire budget. So these are gonna be decks that don't have Harmonics, so if you already have one, then it'll only cost this much. Or if you're just now starting with premium, you're gonna be basically having to pay the Harmonics tax if you want to play super competitive. But these decks here are gonna be decks that are really solid and are very cheap to get basically the core of it. Now there could be like some different techs or like one really expensive stride you can put in that makes your deck very slightly better. For the most part, for these decks to function and be playable at a high level, it's actually not that much. So first up is Dodo Regulars, and this is Shardhawk Gasteel. So this deck got a really huge resurgence during BRO, and it's really good. So our main grade 3 is Shardhawk Vampire. That is our primary ride target when we ride up to grade 3. And we use it in conjunction with the History Collection stride Kiss Kill Lyra. So whenever we stride on top of Shardhawk, we can Counterblast 1, Soul Charge 2. Your Vanguard gets the skill that on attack, if your soul has 6 or more cards, then your opponent retires something. And then Kiss Kill Lyra's effect is on hit, you Soul Charge 2, and then if you have 6 or more soul, you draw a card. So both of these together, you will Soul Charge 4, you get 2 protect markers, and you will draw a card and retire something. On the turn after, you try to ride Gasteel. So Gasteel doesn't give a protect marker, even though it's a V unit, and it has the effect that at the start of your battle phase, you Counterblast 1, and your opponent chooses one of these effects for every 5 cards in your soul. All of your front row units get a crit for the turn. Set the opponent's Vanguard power to 1. Your opponent can't activate auto abilities this turn, and your opponent chooses a card from their hand and puts it face down in the damage zone. So the primary goal is to get to 20 soul, so then your opponent has to do all of these effects. Your front row will gain a crit, your opponent will take a damage, the power is set to 1, and they can't use auto abilities. That's the strongest part about this card, is that it shuts down basically G-Guard effects, unless it's specifically a continuous effect, and also shuts down perfect guards, which then just makes the turn very hard to live. And then in conjunction with Hope on Damp, then it makes it really hard. So whenever you play Hope on Damp, if you have 20 more cards in soul, then whenever your opponent guards from hand, they have to guard with a total shield value of 20k increments. If they have a 15k and a 5k shield, they can only guard an attack if they guard with both of those cards, instead of having to guard one at a time. What this also shuts down is being able to guard with the over trigger and crit sentinels, because those are higher increments of 20k. So you just physically aren't able to guard with those cards anymore. And then the opponent just has to guard super awkwardly. So we try to get this deck to 20 soul on turn 4 and win the game from there. This deck can one-shot people fairly consistently whenever it goes off. So we try to get our soul through Demonted Executioner. On play, you Counterblast 1, Soul Charge 3, and then if you Soul Charged a trigger, then you draw a card. There's the Ride Fixer. Whenever it attacks while boosted, it Soul Blasts 1 and chooses a unit, and then you search your deck in drop zone for up to 3 copies of that card and put it into soul. And then we also have Fu Ginlin, where act once per turn, you can put a card from your hand into soul and draw a card, and then the opponent has to do the same thing. And then at the beginning of your battle phase, if your opponent has 6 or more soul, you Soul Charge 1 and give it a unit plus 5k for the turn. And then we also have Dimension Creeper, where you can Soul Blast it and Soul Charge 2. So all these cards are really big soul charging effects that the deck tries to utilize. So between all of that and the Soul Charge 4 from Shardhawk Vampire, we should pretty consistently get to 20 soul. And then we also have Monochrome of Nightmareland, which is a stand trigger, which stand triggers are really powerful in this deck because of the extra crit and just having an extra attack with that crit, with the power reduction, with the guard restrictions is just really insanely powerful. And Monochrome Cat has the ability to be able to soul charge and counter charge us, so we have all the resources in the world in order to utilize all of these effects. And then we have Kihagra, which can add those monochromes from soul back to our hand, and then the monochromes can shuffle themselves back into deck. So then we have more stand triggers. And if that wasn't enough, in our G zone, we also have Forfax. At the end of the battle, your grade 3 Vanguard attacked a grade 3 or greater Vanguard. Then you can Counterblast 1, discard 5, stride Forfax from your G zone. If your deck has 13 or less cards, then you can choose up to 3 crits from your soul and shuffle them back into your deck. So 4th axe is just additional drive checks where you can hit the stands or hit more crits that you're shuffling back into deck, and it could just really easily just win the game outright from there. This deck is probably the most bang for your buck because you don't really need to buy anything to upgrade this. The only card you really need is Harmonix Messiah to make this fully competitively viable. But outside of that, this deck is basically done other than like some other side options you could play. But yeah, this deck is very, very good and you can definitely get some wins off of it. Next up, I can't believe I'm saying this, it's Royal Paladin. If you know anything about Premium and Royal Paladin, there's a card called Crystal Luster Dragon, which fluctuates between $40 and $90 every other day. But no matter what price in that range, it's still absurd. But the neat thing is, there is a build that does not need Crystal Luster and is actually like really solid. Introducing Altmile. So this is an Altmile beatdown deck. So our main grade 3 is Blue Sky Knight Altmile. So whenever we stride on top of it, we can Counterblast 1 and give 2 units plus 5k for the turn. And our main stride is Godblade, which has on hit you call a grade 2 or higher unit from your deck. And then we utilize this to have insane attack extension throughout a turn. So one of our primary attack extenders is Ashley. So at the end of battle it attacks, you can Soul Blast 2 and search your deck for a grade 2 or less Jewel Knight and call it. And if it's on Vanguard, you call 2 instead. There's Suleiman, which on attack, if your Vanguard is an Altmile, you can Counterblast 1, discard a card, and search your deck for any grade 2 and call it. And then there's also Albion, which on attack, you Counterblast 1, Soul Blast 1, search your deck for 1 card with the Brave ability, which Suleiman has. And then you call it, and then it gets the effect of Brave on hit, you bounce that unit back to your hand. So between all of these and Godblade, we have so many ways to extend our attacks to try to push for damage and try to solidify a win pretty quickly. The rest of the deck is just consistency boosters. So we have a Jewel Knight package with Laylee, which can send back our attack extenders into deck, soul charge, and gains power. And then whenever we call over it, then that unit gets plus 10k power as well. There's Alwayn, which can soul charge during main phase. And then whenever you call over it, you check top 2 and add a Jewel Knight to hand. There's Boy for this, where whenever you call over it, you draw a card. And there's also Eunice, where at the end of the battle, it boosted, bot deck a normal unit from your drop zone, soul charge 1, and bounce Eunice back to hand. And it can also potentially draw cards and give retire to the deck as well. So all of these mesh well into a really solid core engine for the deck, where you can basically just always have ways to push for damage. For our G-Zone isn't that great. We're basically just running 4 Godblade because it's our best attack extender, because it can search out Ashley. But we also have Eulogius, which can potentially also draw more cards and get us more attack extenders in the long term, and give us a force marker, which lets us hit harder. We have Saints of Twin Sword for really late game scenarios. If we have a ton of cards face up, then we're able to just utilize all these mid battle phase call attack extenders in order to get really massive and have all of our attacks hit really, really hard. And yeah, the only real upgrade you could do to this build is you could add some Crystal Luster if you ever have the funds for it. Crystal Luster gives another way to win the game, because after you do your Altmile turn, then you can ride Ashley, then stride Crystal Luster, and then you have 3 card Guard Restrict, and then you also have Ashley effect, which will call 2 Jewel Knights from your deck as well. But in the process, you lose out on the Suleiman attack extender because you're on Ashley instead of Altmile. But yeah, for the most part, this is a really solid deck that can still do a number for a pretty cheap price. Next up is another weird one I didn't think I was going to get to say, which is Steam Maiden. So because of the last couple ban lists, Steam Maidens have gotten a lot cheaper. It's still not a bad deck though. The core engine of how this deck functions is still really solid. They just lost the absurd +3 that Enerana gave and made it a little bit less consistent. So our main grade 3 is Steam Maiden Alul. We mostly use it for the Steam Maiden name, but there's some scenarios where we do have to use it as our main grade 3. So it has act once per turn. You can bind a card from your drop zone and call a Steam Maiden from your bind zone. At the end of the battle that your Steam Maiden rearguard attacked, you can bind it, call a card from your bind zone that has +1 grade. And then if you called a grade 1, then you countercharge 1. And then during your turn, it has +1k power for each card in your bind zone. But if it's on Vanguard, then it has +3k power instead. So Alul is our primary ride target, but if we go first, then we ride V Chronojet Dragon, which basically just allows us to go into Time Leaper Dragon on our first grade 3 turn, and then Time Leaper will directly search out our one of Enarana and still gain power. And then we go back down to Chronojet Dragon, and then we have 2 force markers on the following turn. And then if we ride Elul or another Chronojet, then we'll have 3 force markers, which this deck can very easily abuse. So Enarana, whenever you play it, you cast 1, search your deck for the Gear Cat, and then call it. And then at the end of the battle, it attacked while boosted. You Soul Blast 1, check top 2, add 1 to hand, and put the other in bind zone. And then the Gear Cat, whenever it's placed, you check top 3 and add a Steam Maiden to hand and bot deck the rest. So the Enarana plus Gear Cat combo is really insane. It's essentially a +3 where you add 2 cards to hand and put 1 on board, and you also get an early game from it. Now, because it was put to 1, it made the deck a lot less consistent on finding this on turn 2. But on turn 3, you can directly search it out very easily through Time Leaper and be able to start working off of that from there. Then for our Steam Maiden package, we're playing 4 Elul and 4 Ilul. So they both have the effect that at the end of the battle they attacked, if your Vanguard's a Steam Maiden, you can cast 1, bind them, and then call a card from your bind zone that's 1 grade higher. So essentially you'll go from Ilul the grade 1 to Elul the grade 2, and then go from Elul up to a grade 3. And then if you have Elul on your Vanguard, or if you have Shlishma face up in your G-Zone, then you can go from grade 3 to grade 4 as well. And then with our G-Zone, we have Shlishma. So on attack, you bind 1 of your rear guards, and then you call 2 cards from your bind zone, and give your front row plus 10k power for the turn. At the end of the battle that your grade 3 rear guard attacked, you could Soul Blast 1 and call Shlishma from your G-Zone. So Shlishma just gives the deck insane attack extension, and just raises the ceiling of this deck insanely high. And we utilize Shlishma as our primary way to push for game a lot of the time. Next up is Murakumo. So we have Yasui Shirayuki. So whenever you stride on top of Yasui, you can cast 1, target a rear guard, and clone 2 of it from your deck. And then Ushimitsu Train also does the same thing, where it's on hit instead of on stride. Due to all of this, we have so many ways to just build a board out of nothing. Our primary target is with Fright Sickle. So whenever it attacks, you can give him plus 5k power for the battle. And then at the end of the battle, you bot deck him. And if he was called from an effect that turn, then you get to draw a card as well. So you'd call Fright Sickle, and then you stride on top of Yasui with Train, do Yasui effect, call 2 more Fright Sickles, and then you attack with those 2 Fright Sickles, and then you swing with Ushimitsu Train. With the on-hit effect of Train, you'll be able to call 2 more Fright Sickles out, and swing with those and draw 2 more cards off of that. And then you also get 2 Excels whenever you do this play. So in total, you're drawing 6 cards, and then you're getting 3 more from drive checks, so you're getting almost double-digit cards into your hand extra. And then on the following turn, we try to stride into Izushi Otome, which essentially just allows us to attack from back row whenever you have rear guards with the same name. And then you utilize both Shirayukis in order to minus power from the opponent. So one of them minuses 10k power to the front row. If you call it to rear guard, then it's only 5k. And then the other one, whenever something attacks and doesn't hit, you can counterblast 1 and give your opponent's Vanguard minus 10k power. So with all of these in combination, you can minus a ton of power from the opponent's board and the Vanguard, and units can go negative in this game. So it's not super far off that you can get the opponent to like negative 30k power. But with Izushi Otome allowing you to attack from back row, you just also get a ton of extra attacks off of it while the opponent is at super low power. And to top it all off, we also have Shibaraku Victor. So while it's face up in G-Zone, you can Soul Blast 1, and if one of your rear guards doesn't hit, then you can call Shibaraku Victor from G-Zone. So like Shlishma, just this gives us an additional attack that the deck can utilize. And if you have 2 of them face up, then you basically create a mini loop where you can keep calling over the Shibaraku Victors. If the opponent is at 5 damage, they're forced to guard it all, or they're forced to take 1 damage. And then the last deck is Noag Grappler. A lot of people have been asking me for a Victor deck profile. I'm taking a break from the clan because I've played an unhealthy amount of games for BCS, but this is still a really good deck that you can pick up for relatively cheap, actually. It was expensive for a little bit, but it started coming back down in price. So this deck is all about restanding your rear guards and gaining a ton of power and just outputting some of the highest numbers this game can get to. So we utilize our history collection stuff with Extreme Battler Victor and Meteor Kaiser Victen. In tandem together, you get 2 Excel markers, and then you also get a Counterblast 1, restand something, give it +5, and then a free version of that. So at minimum, if you just have 1 rearguard in play, you can swing for 3 times. If you have 2 rearguards in play, then you can swing 5 times. There's a lot of effects that gain additional benefits whenever you restand them. A primary one is Extreme Battler Sazanda. So while it's on an Excel circle and one of your other units stand, that unit that stands and Sazanda gets plus 5k power for the turn. And then there's also Golsachi, where once per turn, if you have Generation Break 2, then whenever Golsachi restands, it gets plus 7k power. And then we also have Guns Dawn, which whenever it restands, it gets plus 4k power for each face-up card in your G-Zone once per turn. So all of these just increase the numbers this deck can get insanely high, especially Sazanda in some late game scenarios where we have mass board restands. We also play the V Extreme Battler Victor. It's an Excel marker, and whenever you ride it, then you check top 7 and call a grade 2 or less Extreme Battler. So you can dig for pieces you need, and you get the extra Excel marker, so you have a wider board with a lot more attacks going for it. And then our last grade 3 is Zubat Battler Victor, mainly as an alternative ride, and it's good into some control matchups in order for you to sustain longer into the game. Our primary win condition is through Favorite Champ Victor. So at the end of battle it attacks, you can blast 2 and discard a card and stand a rearguard for each face-up card in your G-Zone. If you stood 3 or more rearguards, then you can discard 3 and restand Favorite Champ Victor, and then you countercharge 1, and he loses 2 drive checks. Now, this is not once per turn, so if you have enough counterblasts and enough cards in hand, you can restand your board multiple times in a turn. In combination with Sazanda, all of it's getting power throughout the entire time. The way we get there is through G-guarding a lot or through Universe Ace Busted. So every time a rearguard stands, you can Soul Blast 1 and flip up a card in your G-Zone, and Busted gains +1 drive. At the end of battle, Busted attacks if he has 5 or more drive checks. You can discard 3 and restand him with -5 drives. Neither of these effects are once per turn, so you can pretty easily get busted up to like 7, 8 drive checks, and then restand him, and then swing again with a bunch of more drives. And then throughout all that process, you flip up a bunch of cards in your G-Zone, and Favorite Champ Victor gets a lot stronger because of that. And here's the deck list. This is essentially just Stephen Lee's build that he won Vancouver with, which is shockingly really cheap. The only expensive card is Dryger, which is a $50 card, but you don't need Dryger to play this deck. He only comes up like once every 5 games usually. But if you want to upgrade the deck, that's the primary thing you can get to upgrade it. And with that, that is all of the premium decks. If you have any questions or other decks you want to mention, comment down below. And yeah, like, comment, subscribe, all that jazz. I'll see you guys in the next one.